There's a new law, an anti-critical race theory law that has passed in North Dakota. And I want to read a couple of portions of it. And I also want to play a clip from my friend over at the Damage Report, John Iadarola. In this law, each school district and public school shall ensure instruction of its curriculum and is factual and objective. A school district or a public school may not include instruction related to critical race theory in any portion of the district's required curriculum under various sections or any other curriculum offered by the school district. For the purposes of this section, watch this. Critical race theory means the theory that racism is not merely the product of individual bias or prejudice, but that racism is systemically embedded in American society and the American legal system to facilitate racial inequality. The superintendent of public instruction shall adopt rules to govern this section. Funny, they don't know the meaning of critical race theory, but they create a law and then insert their own meaning, and the meaning that they insert doesn't match the true meaning, but it conveniently matches one that's going to shut every teacher up about talking about systemic racism in that state.
Well, let me offer another reading of it. My undergraduate work was in ethnic studies, and so I find it ironic that this is actually much closer to some of the tenets of critical race theory than what you hear and a lot of the people going to school boards who know nothing about it. Only in that they make a distinction very specifically here. Check this out. They really want to focus on racism, defining it as an individual bias or prejudice, right? This is that classic racism note. This is the thing that people who have been marching and moving for years in our country, the entire civil rights movement, they weren't marching just to not be called out their name. That'd be a nice cherry on top, but they were addressing the systemic structures that were causing the racialized outcomes. Right. If we go with this language, though, that means that this school district, which has disparate outcomes racially, has to then determine that the outcomes of their race of their racialized outcomes must be based, according to their own definition here, on individual bias and prejudice, which means that the people who are giving the curriculum, who are providing the curriculum, must be individually prejudiced or basis. It can't be unintentional systemic nature. It has to be individuals. If I'm going to look at this definition as it is,
it blew their cover. Well, see, in a way, because if you look at it as systemic, then are you saying because they're looking at it as individual, then it means there's culpability on the individual level versus a systemic level?
If we go play this down the line, then I no longer have the option to look at systems and structures that have been set up when overtly racially still having an impact. I don't have an out in that way. I have to point to individuals as opposed to systemic pieces, which is going to come back to bite them as we go and we see this play out, let alone the fact that in the part here, it says American legal system to facilitate racial inequality. This is the kind of the crux of the anti-CRT argument here, is that somehow there's nothing I can do about the racism around me, and therefore I am perpetually racist, which is what people have an issue with being called that, as opposed to the fact that inertia from history has outcomes, and we need to analyze it. That's what the body of scholarship around critical race theory is saying. Let me analyze the things that we've set up and see where we can dismantle some of those structures. And so I just think that this law is going to be problematic for them, because if I go with the definition that racism is an individual thing, then that means that the racialized outcomes that I have must be addressed as an individual level, and that means that I'm calling everybody in my system racist. I just think they might want to think about that.
I hear you. I see what you're saying. But one of the things conservatives have become extremely adept at doing is inoculating themselves against individual claims of racism, even if it gets down to the point where they say, well, I'm an individual and God would just have to forgive me, and that's the end of conversation. We don't have to change anything.
Well, look at it, go both ways, right? If it suits me, I'm going to go individual because you're bringing something that's systemic and I don't want to address that. And so I move it to individual, and then I change the game. If I address something individual, somebody individual did, then all of a sudden I want to zoom out to something systemic, right?
It's a game. Yep.
It's a shell game back and forth, and so whatever's going to help my argument best at the moment is what's going to thrive. And so you just got to watch for that back and forth, because I've seen it happen. Somebody does something, an individual does something that's individually racist. They use a racial epithet or name. We have a school where a group of kids, made a video telling a little black girl to go kill herself and call her the N-word and all this stuff, and they had a whole school walkout with it here in Minnesota, right? Which is not new. There's many different places where that has come up, just not been public. But when you want to address, people are calling for individual addressing of those kids, and all of a sudden we zoom out and want to have systemic response to it. But then if we have a systemic response that says black students have been facing this all the day, we say, well, these students in this one situation faced it, and we go back to individual. And so we see this dance back and forth.
You know, I want to agree with you that this bill is going to be a problem with them in the long run. I do see your argument. I guess I think that they've already gamed this out. You know, they've gamed this out to the conclusion, and you're just saying that they've miscalculated that in the long run this could just very well just backfire on them.
A potential landmine if somebody wanted to go back and figure out how to address it or fight it. But I want to also say that this has come forward in ways that use different words. So if I know that critical race theory, anti-critical race theory language like this isn't going to play in my society, that I've been using other words, like in Minnesota, you'll see things like indoctrination. Or other synonyms try to be used in order to try to basically put something in place that stops people from teaching this critical lens of the United States. And again, it's for the protection of this idea somehow that to talk about it means I'm bad, or to bring it up means that there's something inherently wrong with me. And what if that is true? Don't we want to fix and move forward? I mean,
that's the thing. You know what, man? That's the big. If there was something that you found out about yourself that you needed to improve, like me, we would. But I have found that most people, when they when they intersect with something that's an inconvenient truth about themselves, they would much rather just ignore it because of the emotional and physical pain that it causes to look at yourself in the mirror.
Which is the cultural antithesis to many cultures and folks around the country and around the world, where if something is wrong, addressing it is the act of love. It is the act of participation. It is the act of pride, because we're going to fix it and move forward. To close our ears and blind our ears to it, stop us from doing that. Here's the thing. That same law, if we use that definition and we do all that, then a whole bunch of the stuff that you already do in social studies, that critical thinking that happens, can be questioned. And that's another problem that folks are going to have. Is that then just teaching about, let's say, Crispus Attucks and the starting of the revolution. If you're going to look at that with a critical lens, your social studies teacher can get dinged from somebody, a parent or somebody who wants to have an issue with that because they feel bad, because it makes them feel bad about complicitness of their own ancestry.